The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Willow Creek, a town that existed purely because the railroad decided it should. Steam hissed from the approaching locomotive, carrying with it the scent of coal smoke and distant promises. Marshal Ezra Kane adjusted his black hat and checked his pocket watch for the third time in 10 minutes. The train was exactly on schedule, which meant his carefully orchestrated plan was about to unfold. At 32, Ezra had built his reputation on precision and control. Every arrest, every investigation, every decision was calculated. Today would be no different. Or so he thought. The locomotive's whistle pierced the morning air, announcing the arrival of more than just another routine passenger train. Hidden in that piercing sound was the first hint that Ezra's orderly world was about to be turned completely upside down. 3 months earlier, Ezra had sat in the cramped office above Murphy's General Store, staring at a stack of correspondence applications. The federal marshal position required certain ... appearances. A wife, specifically. The territorial governor had made it clear that unmarried lawmen were viewed as unstable, unreliable. A man with a wife has something to lose, Governor Harrison had said during their last meeting, something to keep him honest. Ezra had nodded, understanding the politics even if he disagreed with the sentiment. He'd survived 5 years as a marshal precisely because he had nothing to lose, nothing to cloud his judgment. But advancement required compromise. The mail-order bride agencies promised discretion and efficiency. For $200, they would arrange a suitable macho woman seeking security in exchange for companionship and domestic stability. It was a business transaction, nothing more. He'd selected Charlotte Whitmore from Boston based on her letter alone. 26 years old, educated, experienced in household management. Her photograph showed a pleasant but unremarkable face framed by dark hair. Most importantly, she'd written with the practical tone of someone who understood their arrangement was professional, not romantic. I seek a respectful partnership, her letter had stated. I have no illusions about love or romance. I simply wish for a stable life away from the constraints of city society. Perfect, practical, predictable. Now, as the train's brakes screeched against the rails, Ezra felt satisfied with his methodical approach. Charlotte would arrive, they would marry in a simple ceremony, and she would manage his household while he focused on his work. Clean, efficient, mutually beneficial. The passenger car doors opened, and travelers began stepping onto the wooden platform. Ezra scanned each face, looking for the woman whose photograph he'd memorized. An elderly couple emerged first, followed by a traveling salesman with his sample cases, then a young mother with 2 small children, and then she appeared as breath caught in his throat. The woman stepping gracefully from the train car bore only a passing resemblance to the photograph he'd studied, where the picture had shown someone pleasant but plain. Reality presented something entirely different. Her hair, which had appeared simply dark in the photograph, caught the morning sunlight and revealed rich auburn highlights. Her dress, while modest and travel-worn, couldn't hide the elegant way she moved. But it was her eyes that truly unsettled him. Even from across the platform, he could see they held an intelligence and vitality that no photograph could capture. This was not the subdued, practical woman he'd expected. This was someone who might have expectations, hopes, dreams. Someone who might complicate everything. Marshal Kane. Her voice carried a slight Boston accent, cultured but not pretentious. Up close, Charlotte Whitmore was even more striking than he'd realized. She stood with perfect posture, her traveling bag held confidently in one hand, her other extended for a handshake. Miss Whitmore. Ezra removed his hat and accepted her handshake. Her grip was firm, her palm slightly rough, surprising for someone from Boston society. Welcome to Willow Creek. Thank you. She glanced around the dusty platform, taking in the crude wooden buildings, the rutted main street, the general air of frontier. If she was disappointed by what she saw, she didn't show it. It's certainly different from Boston, I imagine so. He gestured toward her single traveling bag. Is this all your luggage? I believed in traveling light. A fresh start seemed to require leaving most of the past behind. There was something in her tone, a hint of story untold, that made Ezra curious despite himself. But curiosity was dangerous. Curiosity led to involvement, and involvement led to complications. The buckboard is just over here, he said instead, focusing on the practical matter of getting her settled. I thought we'd get you situated at the boarding house first. Give you time to rest before we discuss arrangements. Charlotte nodded, but as they walked toward his wagon, she surprised him by asking, what exactly does a federal marshal do in a town like this? Keep the peace, investigate federal crimes, occasionally chase down fugitives who think the frontier offers easy hiding. And does it offer easy hiding? Ezra paused in loading her bag into the wagon, struck by the directness of her question. Most women of her supposed background would make polite small talk about the weather or the journey. They wouldn't ask about criminal matters. For some, he said carefully, but the frontier has a way of revealing a person's true nature. It's hard to maintain pretenses when survival depends on honesty. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Ezra felt as though she was evaluating him as carefully as he was studying her. Then she smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face completely. "How fortunate that I have nothing to hide," she said. But even as she spoke, Ezra noticed how her fingers briefly touched a small locket at her throat. The gesture was unconscious, protective. Whatever Charlotte Whitmore had left behind in Boston, it had followed her west in that small piece of jewelry. The first crack in his carefully controlled plan had appeared. The Willow Creek boarding house sat at the end of Main Street like a tired sentinel, its white paint weathered gray by sun and wind. Mrs. Abernathy, the proprietor, emerged onto the front porch before Ezra even helped Charlotte down from the wagon. "So this is the bride." Mrs. Abernathy's voice carried enough volume to alert half the town. "My word, Marshall, she's prettier than you let on." Ezra felt heat rise in his cheeks. Small towns thrived on gossip, and his arrangement with Charlotte had been the primary source of speculation for weeks. Everyone from the barber to the preacher had offered unsolicited advice about marriage and domestic happiness. "Mrs. Abernathy," Charlotte said with a gracious smile, "I'm Charlotte Whitmore. Thank you for providing accommodation." "Nonsense, dear. Call me Helen. We don't stand on ceremony here." The older woman's eyes sparkled with curiosity as she studied Charlotte from head to toe. "You're not quite what I expected." "What did you expect?" Charlotte asked with genuine interest. Helen glanced at Ezra, then back at Charlotte. "Someone more subdued, I suppose. Our marshal here is such a serious, methodical man. I assumed his choice in a bride would reflect that." Charlotte's laugh was musical, genuine. "Perhaps Marshal Kane will discover he's more adventurous than he realized." The comment was light, teasing, but it sent an unexpected jolt through Ezra. Adventure was exactly what he'd been trying to avoid. Adventure meant unpredictability, risk, emotional complications he couldn't afford. "I'll help you with your bag," he said quickly, eager to redirect the conversation. Charlotte's room was small but clean, with a window overlooking the main street. As Ezra set her traveling bag on the narrow bed, Charlotte moved to the window and gazed out at the town that would become her home. "It's smaller than I imagined," she said softly, having second thoughts. The question escaped before Ezra could stop it. Part of him, a part he didn't want to acknowledge, hoped she might say yes, that she might declare the whole arrangement a mistake and take the next train back to Boston. The other part of him held its breath, waiting for her answer. Charlotte turned from the window, and her expression was thoughtful but resolved. "No, sometimes the smallest places hold the biggest possibilities." She moved closer, and Ezra caught a subtle scent of lavender and something else, something that reminded him of rain-washed mornings and fresh starts. "Marshal Ezra, I want you to know that I understand our arrangement. I don't expect romantic declarations or passionate devotion, but I do hope we can be friends. Partners in the truest sense." Her honesty should have relieved him. Instead, it created an odd hollow feeling in his chest. "That sounds reasonable," he managed. "Good." She extended her hand again, and this time when he shook it, he noticed how her fingers lingered against his. "When shall we discuss the details of our partnership?" "Tomorrow morning. I could show you around town, introduce you to people. We should probably visit Reverend Morrison about the ceremony." "Tomorrow it is." Charlotte's smile was warm, natural. "Thank you, Ezra, for taking a chance on a stranger." As he left the boarding house, Ezra reflected on her words. Taking a chance on a stranger, but which one of them was really the stranger here? Because the woman who'd stepped off that train was nothing like the safe, predictable partner he'd thought he was acquiring, and that realization troubled him more than he cared to admit. The next morning brought unseasonable warmth to Willow Creek. Ezra arrived at the boarding house to find Charlotte already waiting on the front porch, dressed in a simple blue dress that somehow managed to look both practical and elegant. "You're prompt," she observed with approval. "Habit of the job." He gestured down Main Street. "Shall we start with the general store? Murphy carries most everything the town needs." As they walked, Charlotte asked intelligent questions about the town's history, its residents, the challenges of frontier law enforcement. Her curiosity seemed genuine, not the polite interest he'd expected from someone simply fulfilling social obligations. "How many people live here?" she asked as they passed the barber shop. About 300, not counting the ranches outside town. It's grown considerably since the railroad came through. And crime? Is there much trouble? Ezra glanced at her, again struck by her directness. Some, mostly disputes between ranchers and farmers over water rights. Occasional cattle rustling. Last month we had a bank robbery, but we caught the men before they reached the county line. I have a deputy, Tom Bradley. Good man, reliable. Charlotte nodded thoughtfully. It must be lonely work sometimes, dangerous. I knew what I was signing up for. They'd reached Murphy's General Store. But instead of going inside, Charlotte stopped and turned to face him directly. May I ask you something personal? Every instinct told him to deflect, to maintain the careful distance he'd cultivated. But something in her expression, earnest, vulnerable, made him nod. Why did you really choose a mail-order bride? I don't believe it was simply about appearances or advancement. The question hit him like a physical blow, not because it was intrusive, but because it forced him to confront truths he'd been avoiding. I told you, you told me the official reason. What I'm asking about is the real reason. Ezra looked down the dusty street, watching a wagon loaded with supplies make its way toward the edge of town. How could he explain that after 5 years of enforcing law and order, he'd begun to feel like a ghost haunting his own life? That he went days without meaningful conversation, weeks without human connection beyond professional necessity. I suppose I was tired of eating alone, he said finally. The admission surprised him with its honesty. Charlotte's expression softened. That's a good reason, she said quietly. Loneliness is harder to bear than people realize. Something in her tone suggested personal experience with the subject. Before he could ask about it, she'd already turned toward the store entrance. Shall we meet this famous Mr. Murphy? Murphy's store was exactly what Ezra had expected. Charlotte charmed the proprietor within minutes, asked knowledgeable questions about supplies and prices, and handled herself with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in any social situation. She's a keeper, Murphy whispered to Ezra while Charlotte examined fabric samples. Smart as a whip and pretty as a picture. You're a lucky man, Marshall. But as they left the store, Ezra found himself wondering who exactly had gotten lucky in this arrangement. Chapter 5, Unexpected. Depth. That afternoon, Ezra took Charlotte to meet Reverend Morrison and discuss their wedding ceremony. The Reverend, a kindly man in his 60s, welcomed them into his modest study adjacent to the church. I'm delighted to meet you, Miss Whitmore, Reverend Morrison said, settling behind his desk. Marshall Kane has told us so little about you. There hasn't been much opportunity for details. Charlotte replied diplomatically, Of course. These mail-order arrangements can be, well, they require faith on both sides. The Reverend opened a worn ledger. Now, about the ceremony itself, will you want something simple, or ... simple would be perfect, Charlotte said quickly. Perhaps just the basic service. Ezra nodded agreement, but found himself studying Charlotte's profile as she spoke with the Reverend. There was something almost rehearsed about her responses, as though she'd prepared for this conversation. Excellent. We could arrange it for this Saturday, if that suits you both. Just a few witnesses, a Mrs. Abernathy, perhaps, and Deputy Bradley. That would be fine, Ezra said, as they discussed details. Charlotte's hand again went to the small locket at her throat. The gesture was becoming familiar, and increasingly intriguing. After leaving the church, they walked slowly back toward the boarding house. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that made the rough frontier town look almost beautiful. Charlotte, Ezra said as they paused in front of the boarding house, may I ask about your locket? You touch it often. It seems important to you. Charlotte's hand flew to her throat, confirming his observation. For a moment her composed expression wavered, revealing something vulnerable underneath. It was my sister's, she said softly. She died last winter. Consumption. I'm sorry, she was younger than me. Prettier, sweeter, more everything that men typically want in a wife. Charlotte's voice grew distant. She had several suitors in Boston, good men who would have taken care of her, but she wanted to wait, wanted to be sure she truly loved whoever she chose. Ezra waited, sensing there was more to the story. She died waiting for true love, Charlotte continued, and I realized that waiting for perfect love might mean never experiencing any love at all. The admission hung between them in the gathering darkness. Ezra found himself seeing Charlotte in an entirely new light, not as the practical arrangement he'd thought he was making, but as a woman who'd experienced real loss, who'd made difficult choices based on hard-won wisdom. Is that why you answered my advertisement? Charlotte looked up at him, and in the lamplight from the boarding house window, her eyes seemed luminous. Partly, but also because your letters suggested you were a man of substance. Someone who understood that trust and respect can be more valuable than passion. Her words should have reassured him. Instead, they created an odd ache in his chest. Charlotte, I want you to know I'll do my best to be a good husband to you, to honor our agreement. She smiled, and this time there was something different in her expression, something warmer, more hopeful than mere contentment. I believe you will, she said. And Ezra, I plan to be more than just a housekeeper with a wedding ring. I intend to be a true partner. As she disappeared into the boarding house, Ezra stood alone on the darkened street, realizing that his carefully controlled plan was evolving into something he'd never anticipated, something that might actually resemble a real marriage. Chapter 6. The wedding day Saturday. Morning dawned clear and bright, with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything seem possible. Ezra stood before his shaving mirror, adjusting his string tie for the third time. His hands, steady as stone when facing down armed criminals, trembled slightly as he attempted to make the knot perfect. Today he was getting married. The reality of it hit him as he donned his best black suit, the same one he wore for court appearances and formal occasions. In 2 hours, Charlotte Whitmore would become Charlotte Kane. They would share a name, a home, a life. A soft knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Marshal, Udison, come in, Tom. Deputy Tom Bradley entered, looking almost as nervous as Ezra felt. Just wanted to check on you before the ceremony. Make sure you hadn't changed your mind and fled to Mexico. I'm not running anywhere. Ezra attempted a smile. Though I appreciate your confidence in my courage. Hell, Ezra, you've faced down gunfighters and bank robbers. How scary can one woman be? The question was meant to be light-hearted, but it struck closer to truth than Tom could know. Charlotte didn't frighten him because she was dangerous in any conventional sense. She frightened him because she made him want things he'd convinced himself he didn't need. Time to go, Tom said, checking his own pocket watch. Reverend Morrison doesn't like to keep the Lord waiting. The church was more crowded than Ezra had expected. Word of the marshal's wedding had spread, and curious townspeople filled several pews. Mrs. Abernathy sat in the front row, dabbing her eyes with a laced handkerchief even though the ceremony hadn't begun. Ezra took his position at the altar, Tom beside him as best man. The church door opened, and Charlotte entered. Every rational thought fled from Ezra's mind. She wore a dress of ivory silk that caught the light streaming through the church windows. Her auburn hair was arranged in an elegant style he'd never seen before, with small white flowers woven through it. But it was the expression on her face that truly struck him, nervous but radiant, hopeful but determined. She was beautiful. Not just pleasant or attractive, but genuinely, breathtakingly beautiful, and she was about to become his wife. Charlotte walked down the aisle with measured steps, her eyes fixed on his. When she reached the altar, she smiled, a private expression meant only for him, and suddenly the crowded church felt intimate, personal, dearly beloved. Reverend Morrison began, his voice carrying easily through the small sanctuary. We are gathered here today to witness the union of Ezra Kane and Charlotte Whitmore in holy matrimony. The familiar words of the ceremony washed over Ezra, but his attention remained focused on Charlotte's face. She repeated her vows clearly, confidently, her hand steady in his. Do you, Ezra Kane, take Charlotte to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, until death do you part? I do. The words came easily, surprising him with their sincerity. Do you, Charlotte Whitmore, take Ezra to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, until death do you part? Charlotte's eyes met his directly. I do. By the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. Ezra had dreaded this moment, worried it would be awkward, perfunctory. Instead, when Charlotte lifted her face to his, the kiss felt natural, right. Her lips were soft and warm, and for just a moment, he forgot about the watching crowd, forgot about practical arrangements and business transactions for just a moment. It felt like love. The congregation erupted in applause and cheers. Mrs. Abernathy was openly weeping. Tom clapped Ezra on the shoulder with enough force to stagger him. Congratulations, Marshal, Reverend Morrison said with a warm smile. May God bless your union, as they walked back down the aisle as husband and wife. Charlotte's hand tucked into the crook of his arm. Ezra caught sight of their reflection in the church's front window. They looked like a real couple, he realized. Like two people who belonged together. The thought should have terrified him instead. It filled him with an unfamiliar sense of rightness. Chapter 7. New Beginnings. The reception at Murphy's store was modest but cheerful. The townspeople had contributed food and decorations, transforming the normally utilitarian space into something festive. Charlotte moved through the crowd with natural grace, accepting congratulations and making conversation with an ease that impressed Ezra. "She's perfect for you," Mrs. Abernathy declared, appearing at his elbow with a plate of cake. "Mark my words, Marshall, that woman is going to change your life." Ezra watched Charlotte laughing with the doctor's wife, her face animated and genuinely happy. "She already has." The admission surprised him with its truth. As the afternoon wore on, the reality of their situation became increasingly clear. Tonight, Charlotte would move into his house. They would share meals, conversations, daily life. The arrangement that had seemed so straightforward on paper now felt complex and uncertain. "Ready to go home?" Charlotte asked, appearing beside him as the reception wound down. "Home." The word sounded different when she said it. They collected Charlotte's belongings from the boarding house and loaded them into the wagon. The ride to Ezra's house, their house now, was quiet but not uncomfortable. Charlotte seemed to be taking in everything: the tree-lined street, the neat yards, the sense of established community that existed even on the frontier. "It's lovely," she said, as they pulled up in front of the two-story frame house Ezra had purchased the previous year. "It's solid. Good construction, reasonable space." He helped her down from the wagon, hyper-aware of the brief contact as his hands encircled her waist. "Those are practical virtues," Charlotte agreed, "but it's also welcoming. It feels like a place where people could be happy." Inside, Charlotte moved from room to room with obvious interest. The house was clean but spartanly furnished, functional rather than comfortable. It reflected its bachelor owner in every detail. "The kitchen is well appointed," she observed, running her hand along the sturdy wooden counter. "And this parlor has good light for reading." "I'm not home much during the day," Ezra said, feeling oddly defensive about his house's shortcomings. "I never saw the need for ... decoration." Charlotte turned to face him, her expression gentle. "Ezra, this is a good house. With a woman's touch, it could be a wonderful home." The distinction was subtle but significant. A house was sheltered. A home was sanctuary. "I've put your things in the spare room," he said, addressing the practical matter they'd both been avoiding. "Until you're comfortable with other arrangements." Charlotte nodded, and he thought he saw relief in her expression. "Thank you. That's very considerate." An awkward silence fell between them. They were married now, legally bound, but still essentially strangers navigating uncharted territory. "Would you like some coffee?" Charlotte asked. "I could start getting familiar with the kitchen. That would be nice." As Charlotte moved efficiently around the kitchen, Ezra found himself really watching her for the first time. She worked with practiced competence, but there was something else, a subtle satisfaction in the domestic activity that suggested she genuinely enjoyed creating comfort and order. "Seem at home in a kitchen," he observed. "I managed my father's household for several years before his death," Charlotte said, measuring coffee grounds. "I find there's something soothing about creating something useful, something that brings pleasure to others." "What did your father do?" Charlotte's movements stilled for just a moment. "He was a teacher. Literature and philosophy at a small college." There was something in her tone, a careful neutrality that suggested there was more to the story. But before Ezra could probe further, she'd resumed her work and changed the subject. "Tell me about your typical day," she said. "I want to understand your routine so I can plan around it." They spent the evening discussing practical matters: meal preferences, household schedules, social obligations. It was all very civilized, very reasonable, but underneath the mundane conversation, Ezra sensed something else, a growing awareness of each other as individuals rather than mere partners in a business arrangement. When Charlotte finally excused herself to retire, Ezra sat alone in his parlor, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of another person moving through his house. The creak of floorboards overhead, the soft closing of a door, the whisper of water in the basin. His orderly bachelor existence had ended. Whatever came next would be uncharted territory for both of them. As he climbed the stairs to his own room, he paused outside Charlotte's door, hearing her soft humming a melody he didn't recognize but that somehow sounded like contentment. For the first time in years, Ezra Kane fell asleep to the comforting knowledge that he was not alone in the world. Chapter 8. Growing closer. The next few weeks established a rhythm to their married life that surprised Ezra with its naturalness. Charlotte proved to be everything she'd claimed: an excellent housekeeper, a skilled cook, and a thoughtful companion. But she was also more than he'd bargained for. She had opinions, strong ones. "The jail needs better ventilation," she declared one morning over breakfast, after visiting town with him the previous day. "That man you're holding for," Cato rustling, looked half dead from the stale air. He's a criminal, Charlotte, not a guest at a hotel. He's still a human being, and if he dies of lung fever in your jail, his family might have grounds for legal action against the county. Ezra paused, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. The observation was astute, practical, and something he hadn't fully considered. You're right, he admitted. I'll speak to the county commissioner about improvements. Charlotte smiled, clearly pleased to be taken seriously. Thank you. Similar conversations became commonplace. Charlotte had a gift for seeing situations from fresh perspectives, for identifying problems and potential solutions that Ezra's familiarity had blinded him to. More surprisingly, she showed genuine interest in his work. Tell me about the Henderson case, she said one evening as they sat in the parlor, she with her needlework and he with legal documents. What would you like to know? You said you suspect the eldest son of stealing cattle from his own father's herd. What evidence do you have? Ezra found himself explaining the case in detail, surprised by how helpful it was to talk through the facts with someone who could ask intelligent questions. Charlotte listened carefully, occasionally offering observations that made him consider new angles. Have you spoken with the younger son? She asked, briefly. He supports his brother's alibi, but reluctantly. Ezra looked up from his papers, struck by her perception. How did you know that? You said he supports the alibi, not that he confirmed it. There's a difference. Charlotte set down her sewing. People tell the truth in the words they choose not to use. The insight was remarkably sophisticated, suggesting depths to Charlotte's understanding of human nature that he was only beginning to appreciate. Would have made an excellent detective, he said. Charlotte's laugh was musical but held an odd note. I'm not sure that would have been considered a suitable profession for a woman in Boston. What would have been suitable? Marriage to an appropriate gentleman, management of his household, production of his heirs. Her tone was light, but Ezra detected an undercurrent of frustration. My sister used to say I thought too much for my own good. Your sister was wrong. The words escaped before Ezra could consider them, but he meant them completely. Charlotte's intelligence was one of the things he'd come to value most about her company. Their eyes met across the lamplit parlor, and something passed between them, a moment of real recognition, of appreciation that went beyond their practical arrangement. Thank you, Charlotte said softly. That means more to me than you might realize. The first real test of their marriage came 6 weeks after the wedding, when Deputy Bradley knocked on their door at midnight with news that would change everything. Marshal, we've got trouble, Tom said, still breathless from his hard ride. Bank robbery in Copper Falls. 3 men, heading this way. Sheriff Morrison wants you to coordinate the pursuit. Ezra was already reaching for his gun belt before Tom finished speaking. How long ago? For hours. They've got a good start, but they're riding hard with heavy set. Horses will tire. I'll be ready in 10 minutes. As Tom disappeared back into the night, Ezra turned to find Charlotte standing in the parlor doorway, her wrapper pulled tight around her hair, loose around her shoulders. How dangerous is this? She asked directly. Dangerous enough. Bank robbers don't usually surrender peacefully. Charlotte nodded, her expression calm but concerned. What do you need me to do? The question surprised him. Most women would have protested, demanded he stay safe, made the situation about their own fears. Charlotte was asking how she could help. Nothing. Just wait for me to come back. How long might that be? Days, maybe a week if they reach the mountain passes. Charlotte stepped closer, and in the lamplight, he could see the worry she was trying to hide. Ezra, I know this is your job. I'm not going to ask you to avoid your duty, but I need you to promise me you'll be careful, that you'll come back to me. The last words came out in a whisper, and suddenly Ezra realized that their arrangement had become something more for her too. She wasn't just concerned about losing a practical partnership, she was worried about losing him. I promise, he said, and meant it. Without thinking, he reached out and touched her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheek. She leaned into the contact, and for a moment, they stood frozen in an intimacy that went far beyond anything their practical arrangement had encompassed. Then Tom's voice called from outside, and the moment shattered. I have to go, Ezra said. I know. Charlotte rose on her toes and kissed him, not the polite peck they'd shared at their wedding, but something deeper, more desperate. Be safe. Ezra rode into the night with the taste of her on his lips and the realization that somewhere in the past 6 weeks, he'd fallen in love with his wife. Chapter 10. The chase. The pursuit lasted 5 days through some of the most unforgiving terrain in Colorado. Ezra and his posse of 6 men tracked the robbers through rocky canyons and dense forests, always one step behind, but never quite able to close the distance. On the 3rd day they found the robbers' camp from the previous night, still warm but empty. "They're pushing hard," observed Jake Morrison, the local sheriff. "Harder than smart men would push. Desperate men make mistakes," Ezra replied, studying the tracks leading away from the campsite. "We stay on them." But as they climbed higher into the mountains, the terrain became increasingly treacherous. Loose shale, narrow trails, sudden drop-offs that could kill a horse and rider in an instant. On the 5th day they finally caught up. The confrontation came at dawn in a box canyon where the robbers had finally been forced to make a stand. 3 hard-faced men with nothing left to lose, their horses exhausted, their supplies nearly gone. "Federal Marshal," Ezra called out, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "You're surrounded. Drop your weapons and surrender." The response was a rifle shot that chipped rock inches from his head. What followed was a brief but vicious gunfight that ended with 2 of the robbers dead and the 3rd wounded but alive. Most of the stolen money was recovered, and justice was served. But as Ezra bound the wounded robber's shoulder, he found himself thinking not about the successful completion of his duty, but about Charlotte waiting for him at home, about the worry in her eyes when he'd left, about the promise he'd made to return to her. For the first time in his career as a lawman, Ezra Kane had someone to live for beyond the job itself. Chapter 11, Homecoming. Charlotte heard the horses before she saw them, and her heart began racing with a mixture of relief and anxiety. 6 days. 6 days of not knowing whether Ezra was alive or dead, safe or injured, coming home or lost forever in the wilderness. She'd discovered that loving someone meant living with the constant possibility of loss. Through the kitchen window, she saw the weary posse riding down Main Street. Even at a distance, she could recognize Ezra's straight-backed posture, the particular way he sat his horse. He was alive. He was whole. He was coming home to her. Charlotte didn't wait for him to reach the house. She ran down the front steps and met him as he dismounted, throwing herself into his arms with an abandon that would have shocked the proper Boston lady she'd once been. "You're safe," she whispered against his chest, breathing in the scent of leather and trail dust and something essentially him. "I promised I would be," Ezra replied, his arms tightening around her. They stood in the middle of the street, holding each other, oblivious to the curious stares of passers. For both of them, it was a moment of recognition. They had become something more than business partners, more than friends sharing a household. They had become a couple in love. "Come inside," Charlotte said finally. "You look exhausted." "I am." But first, Ezra reached into his saddlebags and withdrew a small wrapped package. "I saw this in Copper Falls and thought of you." Charlotte unwrapped the gift with trembling fingers. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet, simple but elegant, with a small charm in the shape of a star. "It's beautiful," she breathed, genuinely moved not just by the gift but by the thought behind it. In the middle of a dangerous pursuit, he'd taken time to think of her. The shopkeeper said the star represents guidance. "Finding your way home." Ezra's voice was rough with exhaustion and emotion. It seemed appropriate. Charlotte looked up at him, this man who'd started as a stranger, become a husband of convenience, and somehow transformed into the center of her world. "Help me put it on." As Ezra fastened the bracelet around her wrist, his fingers lingering on her skin, Charlotte made a decision that would have terrified her just weeks earlier. "Ezra," she said softly, "I don't want to sleep in the spare room anymore." Their eyes met, and the understanding that passed between them needed no words. What had begun as a practical arrangement had become something real, something worth cherishing. "Are you certain?" he asked. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Chapter 12, Truth and Consequences. That night, as they lay together in the master bedroom that was finally, truly theirs, Charlotte traced lazy patterns on Ezra's chest and gathered the courage to tell him the truth she'd been hiding. "Ezra, I need to tell you something. About why I really left Boston." She felt him tense slightly, but his arms didn't loosen around her. "I'm listening." Charlotte took a deep breath. "I told you my father was a teacher, and that's true, but I didn't tell you everything." She paused, gathering strength. "After he died, I discovered he'd been embezzling from the college for years. Not for luxury, we never lived well, but to pay for my sister's medical treatments. The consumption was expensive, and he was desperate." Ezra remained silent, letting her find her own pace. "The college wanted to prosecute, but they were willing to drop the charges if I could repay the money. Nearly $3,000. Charlotte's voice grew smaller. "I had nothing. No inheritance. No prospects. The only asset I had was myself. So you looked for a husband. I looked for an honorable man who might need what I could offer in exchange for security and a fresh start." She turned in his arms to face him. "I'm not the respectable teacher's daughter you thought you were getting. I'm the daughter of a thief fleeing scandal." Ezra was quiet for so long that Charlotte began to fear she'd destroyed everything between them. Then his hand cupped her face with infinite gentleness. Charlotte, do you think I care about your father's mistakes? You're a lawman. You've dedicated your life to justice. I've dedicated my life to protecting people. Your father protected his daughter the only way he knew how. I can't condemn a man for that. Relief flooded through her like warm water. You're not angry, not disappointed. I'm grateful. Grateful. Grateful that his desperation led you to me. Grateful that scandal drove you west. Grateful that you trusted me enough to tell me the truth. Ezra's thumb traced her lower lip. I love you, Charlotte. Not some idealized version of you, but you, all of you. The words hung in the air between them. The first time either had spoken of love directly. I love you too, Charlotte whispered. More than I ever thought possible. They made love again then, slowly, tenderly, sealing their confession with passion and promise. Spring came early to Willow Creek that year, bringing with it a sense of new beginnings that seemed to mirror the transformation in Ezra and Charlotte's marriage. What had started as a practical arrangement had blossomed into something neither had dared to hope for, a partnership built on love, trust, and genuine companionship. Charlotte had indeed transformed their house into a home. Curtains graced the windows, comfortable furniture filled the parlor, and the scent of fresh bread and flowers seemed to permeate every room. But more than physical changes, she'd brought warmth and life to spaces that had once felt empty and echoing. Marshall Kane. The voice belonged to young Billy Patterson, the telegraph operator, who stood nervously on their front porch with an official-looking envelope. Wire for you, sir. Marked urgent. Ezra accepted the telegram with the wariness that urgent communications always brought. In his experience, they rarely contained good news. That he read. Charlotte appeared beside him, her presence a comfort even as his expression grew serious. What is it? She asked quietly. Orders from Denver. They want me to take a position as Chief Deputy Marshal. It's a promotion, significant increase in pay, but... But it would mean leaving Willow Creek. Ezra nodded, folding the telegram carefully. Denver's no place for someone who values peace and quiet. It's rough, dangerous, full of political complications. They stood together on their front porch, looking out at the town that had become their world. Children played in the dusty street, merchants swept their storefronts, neighbors called greetings to one another. It was a simple life, but it was theirs. What do you want to do? Charlotte asked. I want to know what you want to do, Ezra replied. This decision affects both of us. Charlotte was quiet for a long moment, and Ezra could practically see her weighing the options, the security and prestige of a higher position against the peace they'd found in Willow Creek. 6 months ago, I would have told you to take the promotion without question, she said finally. Security, advancement, respectability, those were the things I thought mattered most. And now, Charlotte turned to face him, her eyes bright with certainty. Now I know that home isn't a place or a position. It's being with the person you love, building something together that matters. She reached for his hand. I don't need Denver's opportunities, Ezra. I need you, and our life here. Are you certain? It's a significant opportunity, I'm certain. Charlotte's smile was radiant. Besides, Willow Creek needs its marshal, and I'm rather fond of being the marshal's wife. That evening, Ezra sent his reply to Denver, politely declining the promotion. As he handed the telegram to Billy Patterson for transmission, he felt not disappointment but relief. He'd found something in Willow Creek worth more than career advancement. He'd found happiness. Chapter 14. Full circle 1 year after Charlotte's arrival in Willow Creek. The annual Harvest Festival brought the entire community together for a celebration of the season's bounty. The main street was decorated with bunting and lanterns. Tables groaned under the weight of contributed food, and music filled the evening air. Charlotte stood at the edge of the festivities, watching Ezra demonstrate his marksmanship skills for a group of admiring children. He'd reluctantly agreed to participate in the shooting competition, and his natural skill had made him an unwilling star of the event. Mrs. Kane. Charlotte turned to find Helen Abernathy approaching with a knowing smile. You look positively radiant tonight, my dear. Marriage clearly agrees with you. Thank you, Helen. It does indeed. And the marshal, I've never seen him smile so much. You've worked quite a transformation on our serious lawman. Charlotte glanced back at Ezra, who was now showing a young boy how to hold a rifle properly, his patience with the child evident in every gesture. I think we've transformed each other, she said softly. That's the way the best marriages work, Helen agreed. Speaking of which, any chance we might be hearing the patter of little feet around the Kane household soon? The question made Charlotte's cheeks warm, but her smile was answer enough for the perceptive older woman. I thought so. Helen clapped her hands together in delight. How wonderful. Does the marshal know yet? I plan to tell him tonight, Charlotte confided. After the festivities wind down, he'll be over the moon. That man was born to be a father. Later, as they walked home through the quiet streets, Charlotte slipped her hand into Ezra's and found the courage to share her news. Ezra, I have something to tell you. Should I be concerned? He asked with a teasing smile. The last time you said that, you confessed to being a fugitive from scandal. This is good news, Charlotte assured him. At least, I hope you'll think it's good news. She stopped walking and turned to face him fully. In the moonlight, she could see his expression grow serious as he sensed the importance of the moment. We're going to have a baby, she said simply. For a heartbeat, Ezra stood perfectly still. Then his face broke into the most brilliant smile Charlotte had ever seen. A baby, he repeated, wonder in his voice. Are you certain? As certain as I can be. The doctor confirmed it this afternoon. Ezra swept her into his arms, spinning her around in the middle of the empty street, both of them laughing with pure joy. When? He asked when he finally set her down. Spring, early May, Dr. Henderson thinks. A spring baby, Ezra mused, his hands coming to rest gently on her still flat stomach. Perfect timing for new beginnings. They walked the rest of the way home in comfortable silence, both lost in contemplation of how dramatically their lives had changed in just one short year. Epilogue. Love unexpected. 2 years later, Ezra Kane sat on his front porch, watching his wife tend her garden while their 18-month-old son, James, toddled between the vegetable rows with the determined concentration that only toddlers possessed. Charlotte looked up from her tomato plants, brushing a strand of auburn hair from her forehead, and smiled at him with the same warmth that had captured his heart that very first day. What are you thinking about? She called. Just remembering, Ezra replied. Remembering a man who thought he was ordering a practical arrangement and ended up finding everything he never knew he needed. Charlotte left her gardening and came to sit beside him on the porch steps, James crawling up to claim his mother's lap. Do you ever regret it? She asked. Turning down the promotion, staying in a small town, settling for a quiet life. Ezra looked at his wife, brilliant, beautiful, everything he'd never dared to hope for, and at his son, who had his mother's eyes and his father's stubborn chin. Regret this? He gestured toward their home, their family, their peaceful life. Never, not for a single moment. Charlotte leaned against his shoulder, and Ezra reflected on the mysterious ways that life could surprise a person. He'd thought he was arranging a marriage of convenience, a practical solution to a professional problem. Instead, he'd found love in its truest form and expected transformative and more valuable than any career advancement or worldly success. I love you, Mrs. Kane, he said softly, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. And I love you, Marshal Kane, she replied, more than I ever imagined possible when I stepped off that train, as the sun set over Willow Creek, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. The Kane family sat together on their front porch, content in the knowledge that sometimes the best things in life come disguised as practical arrangements. Sometimes, when you order a wife for work, she brings love instead. And sometimes, love is exactly what you needed all along. The end.